The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which was the same day Linnea Ashworth discovered she no longer had a name worth keeping. She was standing in the solicitor's office in Philadelphia, a narrow room that smelled of old paper and cold radiator, when Mr. Greer slid the document across the desk and told her, in the flattest voice she had ever heard a man use to ruin a life, that her father had signed Ashworth House over to the Duke of Merrow 6 weeks ago. The estate in Devonshire, the one her mother had been born in, the one Linnea had spent every summer of her childhood running barefoot through, learning which floorboards creaked and which windows let in the sea air, and where the garden went soft after rain. Gone. She picked up the paper. She read it once. Then she read the line at the bottom again, slowly, the way you read something you already understand, but need time to accept. In lieu of outstanding debts totaling $412,000, Sir Elliot Ashworth transfers full ownership of Ashworth House, its grounds and contents, to His Grace, the Duke of Merrow, effective immediately. Linnea set the paper down. She did not cry. She had not cried since her mother's funeral, and she did not intend to start now, in front of a man who looked like he had delivered worse news before breakfast. "Is there a provision," she said, "for the household staff?" Mr. Greer blinked. He had clearly expected something else, tears or shouting, or at minimum some questions about herself. "The new owner will determine that. And my father, Sir Elliot left for Europe last week." Of course he had. Linnea thanked Mr. Greer, which was a strange thing to do, but good manners had been drilled into her since she was 4, and some habits do not bend even under the heaviest weight. She walked out into the November Street and stood on the sidewalk while a cab moved past, and 2 women in coats walked by talking about something that mattered to them very much. The Duke of Merrow. She had heard the name. Everyone who read any English society page had. The Merrow family owned a quarter of the Devonshire coastline. The current Duke had inherited at 26 after his father died, had spent the years since expanding what was already a significant fortune into something considerably larger, and had never, as far as Linnea knew, married. He was not reclusive exactly, more like deliberately absent from anything social that didn't serve a purpose. He came to London when he had to. He stayed in Devonshire when he didn't, and now he owned her house. Linnea stood on the sidewalk for 3 more minutes. Then she made a decision that was either very clever or very stupid, and she had not yet worked out which. She would go to Ashworth House, not as Linnea Ashworth, not as the daughter of the man who had just handed her inheritance to a stranger. She would go as someone who needed work, and she would find out what this Duke intended to do with a house that did not belong to him, that had never belonged to anyone but her family for 140 years. She bought a train ticket the next morning. The agency in Exeter did not ask too many questions. Linnea had kept her first name and invented a last, Crane. Linnea Crane, experienced in household service, references available on request. The woman at the desk looked at her hands, which were soft in the way that betrayed a comfortable life, and Linnea explained that she had spent most of her service years in America, which accounted for certain differences. She was placed as a parlor maid at Ashworth House 3 days later. She had not been back to the house in 4 years, and it had changed. Not in structure. The stone was the same dark gray she remembered, the 2 chimneys, the long windows looking out toward the cliff, the garden wall with the iron gate that had always stuck in damp weather. But the inside had changed. The furniture in the entryway was different. Some of the paintings were gone. The house had been made orderly in a way it never was when her father was in it. Her father, who had let things slide into comfortable disorder and called it character. The housekeeper was a compact woman named Mrs. Vale, and she had the expression of someone who slept very little and expected the same from others. "You'll take the east room on the upper floor," Mrs. Vale said, walking Linnea through the service corridor without looking at her. His Grace rises at 6. Breakfast at past. You will not speak to him unless spoken to. You will not enter the study without knocking. You will not discuss the household with anyone outside of it. Understood, Linnea said. Good. Mrs. Vale stopped at a door. He arrived 3 weeks ago. He's been here longer than anyone expected. She said it in a neutral way, but something underneath it suggested that this was unusual, and perhaps not entirely welcome. He is not a difficult man, but he is particular. Linnea tucked that away. The Duke of Merrow was not what she had built in her mind during the train ride from Philadelphia. She had imagined someone harder, older, possibly. The kind of man who acquired properties because they were assets, who never thought about the people who had loved them before. What she saw when she passed the library doorway on her second morning, she had not meant to look, but the door was open, and she was carrying linens. And sometimes you cannot help what you see. Was a man sitting at the desk in the morning light, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled, reading something with the kind of focus that shuts out all other sounds. He was perhaps 35, dark-haired, a face that was not unkind exactly, but that gave very little away. He looked up. Linnea kept walking. That afternoon, Miss Vale found her in the linen closet and told her that His Grace would be taking his evening meal in the small dining room and she was to set the table. The small dining room was not small by any standard. Most people would apply to a room, but at Ashworth House it was the one her mother had preferred. Lower ceilings than the main hall, a fireplace that actually drew properly, a window that looked out to the east side of the garden where the old pear tree stood. Linnea had eaten every birthday dinner in this room until she was 16. She set the table without looking at it too directly. She had not expected it to be this hard, just to be in the rooms. The Duke arrived at 7 exactly. He looked at the table, and then at her, and she realized she had not moved toward the door quickly enough. "You're new," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, Your Grace, I arrived this week." He looked at her for a moment with the same quality of attention he'd given the document in the library. "The table is set correctly." Linnea waited. "The previous maid said it wrong for 2 weeks," he said. "She put the soup spoon on the wrong side." "The left," Linnea said, and then stopped, because she should not have known that. She should have asked or said nothing. A maid who had just arrived would not know the particular preference of a duke she had never served. His Grace was looking at her with something she could not quite name. "Yes," he said. "The left." She moved toward the door. She did not run. She made herself walk at a normal pace, and she did not look back, and she was almost certain that he watched her go. We'll pause here briefly. If you'd like to hear stories like this one, please subscribe to Ruth's Stories so you won't miss what comes next. That night, Linnea sat on the edge of her bed. The same small room that had once belonged to the seamstress her mother kept, a woman named something she couldn't recall now, and she thought about what she was doing. She had a plan, technically. She would find out what the Duke intended for the house, whether he meant to sell it or renovate it or simply hold it. She would find some legal angle that Mr. Greer had missed, or she would find something that proved her father's signature had been given under duress. She had not been to law school. She had no real idea what she was looking for. But she was here, and that was more than she'd had 3 days ago. She was here, and the room still smelled the same. Stone and wood smoke, and something faintly mineral that came from the cliff wind, and she did not yet know if that made it better or worse. She decided not to decide. His Grace, she had learned his name was Thorne Aldbridge, though no one in the house used it. Everyone said Your Grace or His Grace or simply the Duke. Kept unusual hours. He was up before 6 and often working past midnight. He walked every morning before breakfast, even in the cold, even when the wind came off the water hard enough to push against a person. Linnea knew this, because she saw him returning from the cliff path on 3 consecutive mornings, his coat damp at the shoulders, his expression no different than if he had been sitting indoors the whole time. He did not appear to have guests. He received papers from London regularly. He rode out twice a week to the south part of the grounds where the old Ashworth farmland bordered the Merrow property. Linnea had not known until now that the 2 estates shared a border, had never paid attention to maps as a child. She paid attention to everything now. On the 5th day, she was sent to the library to dust the upper shelves. His Grace was not there. She moved along the shelves carefully, relearning the books. Her mother's novels still in the south corner, the legal volumes that had always stood near the window, the illustrated atlases she had pulled out and spread across the floor as a child. She found the gap first, a section of the shelves between the atlases and a row of agricultural manuals, empty except for a few loose papers. She should not have looked at the papers. She told herself this clearly and looked anyway. They were letters. Not personal letters, official ones, from a solicitor's office in London addressed to the Duke of Merrow, regarding the Ashworth estate and something referred to throughout as the Caldwell matter. Linnea did not know what the Caldwell matter was. She read as much as she could before she heard footsteps in the corridor, and then she put the letters back and moved 2 shelves down and was very carefully dusting a row of atlases when the door opened. His Grace looked at her, at the shelf she was dusting. Back at her. "Is there something wrong with the atlas section specifically?" he said, "or are you working in order?" Linnea turned. "Working in order, Your Grace." The upper shelves were the instruction. "I've finished them." He walked to the desk. She continued dusting. The room was quiet except for the sound of papers being moved. After a while, he said without looking up, "You know this house." Linnea's hands went still on the shelf. She made them move again. "I've been here nearly a week now, Your Grace." "That's not what I mean." He looked up. "You moved through the dining room the other night the way someone moves through a room they don't have to think about. You knew where everything was before you looked for it." The fire crackled. Outside, the cliff wind was picking up. Linnea turned to face him. She could lie. It would be easy. She was a stranger. There were no photographs of her in the house that she knew of. Her father had never been the type to display family portraits. She could say she had an eye for rooms, a natural sense of layout, anything. She looked at him. Something in her decided, without consulting the rest of her, that this particular man deserved the truth. "My mother grew up in this house," she said. "She married Sir Eliot Ashworth. I am their daughter." She paused. "My name is Linnea Ashworth." The room was very quiet. His Grace set down his pen. He looked at her for a long moment, that measuring quality again, that patience that didn't push. Then, he said, "Why are you dusting my shelves?" "Because I needed to understand what you intended to do with a house that belongs to my family." The word belongs came out harder than she had planned. She heard it land. "Belonged," he said quietly, not correcting her cruelly, just accurately. "I know the difference," she said. "I'm choosing the present tense." Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, not one. "Sit down, Miss Ashworth," he said. She sat. He did not offer explanations immediately. He poured 2 cups of tea from the pot on the side table, which was a strange thing for a duke to do, and he set one in front of her, and then he sat back in his chair with his own cup and looked at the fireplace. "The Caldwell matter," he said at last. Linnea waited. 30 years ago, your father and a man named Robert Caldwell entered into a shipping venture together. Caldwell was my mother's younger brother, my uncle." He paused. "The venture failed, as ventures do, but it failed because your father withdrew the capital early, without Caldwell's knowledge, through a clause in their agreement that Caldwell had not understood when he signed it. Caldwell lost everything. He lost the business, his house, most of his reputation. He moved to Aberdeen and died there 12 years ago, largely alone. Linnea's cup was warm in her hands. My mother spent those years trying to recover what could be recovered, legally, financially, in every way available to her. He looked at the fire. She could not. Your father's lawyers were better than ours. He paused. She died 4 years ago. She never saw any resolution. The wind moved outside. The pear tree in the east garden would be bending in it. Linnea thought about her father, the man who had sat in the good chair in their Philadelphia drawing room, who had the pleasantest laugh she had known as a small child, who had somewhere along the way become a man who signed things away and left for Europe and did not stay to watch the consequences arrive. She would have wanted you to know, Thorne said. That was always her position. She wrote to your family 3 times requesting a conversation. She received no replies. Linnea closed her eyes for one breath, then opened them. I didn't know, she said. Any of it. I know you didn't. He said it without drama. You were not the one who made those choices. Then why? She stopped. Why? The house. Yes. He set his cup down. When your father's debts were brought to my attention through the solicitor's process, acquiring the estate was the only means available that held any legal weight. Money changes hands too easily. Property is more permanent. He paused. I wanted something permanent. Linnea thought about that. It was an honest answer and an incomplete one, and she could see both things clearly. What do you intend to do with it? She asked. Silence. I haven't decided, he said. She looked at him then. Really looked, without the caution she had been maintaining for 5 days. He was not the man she had constructed on the train. He was something more complicated, a person who had been carrying something for a very long time without quite knowing how to set it down. She understood that. She understood it better than she wanted to. December came to the Devon coast like a wall. The wind sharpened. The sea turned gray-green and rough. Linnea had stayed. There had been no conversation about it, no formal permission asked or given, but she stayed, and Mrs. Vale had stopped treating her like a new employee and started treating her like a particular kind of problem she was working around. She was given different work, less visible, less likely to cause confusion about who she was. She was allowed in the library. She read Catherine Caldwell's letters, her Grace's mother, who had written long and methodical accounts of the legal efforts, the appeals, the dead ends, and she read them in the evenings when the house went quiet, and she understood something slowly that she had not understood before. Grief that has nowhere to go turns into a project. It becomes a task. It becomes the thing you are doing instead of grieving. She understood that too. Thorne found her in the library on a Friday evening. He had taken to coming in during the evenings, not specifically to speak with her, or so she told herself, but the pattern held. He would sit across the room with papers from London, and she would sit with whatever she was reading, and the fire would make its sound between them. That night he looked at what she was holding. My mother's, he said. I know. She didn't apologize for reading them. She asked something she had wanted to ask for a week. The letters to my family, do you have them? Copies, yes. May I see them? He brought them the next day. 3 letters, formally written, asking for a conversation about the Caldwell matter. Each one careful and controlled and containing, just beneath the surface, a woman who was working very hard not to beg. Not one of them bore a response. That night, Linnea walked to the east garden even though the cold was significant, and her coat was not built for Devon winters. She stood by the pear tree, bare-branched now, black against the gray sky, and she tried to feel something that was not shame. She couldn't quite manage it. When she came back inside, Thorne was standing in the corridor near the side entrance. He had a lamp. He looked at her coat. It's below 40, he said. I know. The garden doesn't require supervision after dark. I know that too. He stood there. She stood there. The lamp made a small warm circle between them. She would have liked you, he said. My mother. He said it the way you say a thing you have thought many times and finally decided to let out into the air. She had a particular appreciation for people who stood their ground. Linnea felt something move inside her that she did not immediately name. I read the last of her letters tonight, she said. Not the ones to my father, the private ones. She paused. She wrote about you. He was very still. She was worried you would spend your life on this. Linnea held his gaze. That you would mistake carrying something for honoring someone. The lamp flickered in a draft from somewhere. She was right to worry, he said. His voice was quiet. I know that. Then what happens now? Linnea asked. With the house. A long silence. I don't know, he said. And the words sounded different coming from him than they would from most men. Not like an evasion, but like an actual statement of where he was. A man who was used to knowing things, admitting that something had shifted enough to leave him uncertain. Linnea thought about Ashworth House as it was right now. The fire in the library, the table set the right way, the east garden with the pear tree, the stone floor of the entrance hall cold under her feet every morning. She thought about what it meant to want something back, and what it meant when wanting it back was no longer the whole of the situation. I'm not asking you to give it back, she said. I want you to know that. What my father did to your family, the Caldwells, there's a debt there that a house doesn't fully settle, but it's something real, and I understand why you needed something real. He looked at her. But I am asking you to let me stay, she said. Not as Linnea Crane, as myself. The corridor was quiet. You've been yourself this entire time, Thorne said. Anyone paying attention could see it. She laughed then, a short, surprised sound, the kind that comes out before you can stop it. Thorne looked at her laugh with the expression she had first noticed in the library, that thing that moved in his eyes when she did something he had not expected. She stopped laughing. Neither of them moved. Stay, he said. Not as an invitation exactly. More like a decision he had just arrived at out loud. The house is better with you in it. January in Devon was quieter than December, which she had not thought possible. The coast road sometimes went days without traffic. The village shop kept shorter hours. The sea was a constant sound that stopped being background and started being part of how you thought. Linnea walked every morning. She had taken to going early, before the household was fully awake, out along the cliff path with the sea below and the pale winter light coming in at a low angle across the fields. She told herself it was for the air. One morning she heard a horse behind her and turned to find Thorne coming along the upper path, mounted, his breath making small clouds in the cold. He pulled up when he reached her. You walk fast, he said. You didn't have to keep up. I wasn't keeping up. I was going this direction anyway. She looked at him. All right, he said. I was keeping up. They walked. She walked. He rode at a pace that matched her, in a silence that was comfortable in the way that silences between people become when there is no longer anything to perform. After a while he said, My solicitor sent a proposal from London. Linnea waited. There is a legal mechanism, he said, choosing his words carefully, by which a property might be held in joint arrangement. Not returned outright, the debt remains real, but managed jointly, with clear documentation of both parties' interests. He looked at the sea. It would require your signature alongside mine. What does it mean, in plain terms? It means the house belongs to neither of us entirely. He paused. And to both of us, in a sense. She walked for a few paces. And in the other sense? She said. He looked at her from the horse, and she looked up at him, and the cliff wind came in off the water. That would depend, he said, on what you're willing to consider. Linnea looked back at the path, at the sea below, gray and endless, at Ashworth House visible in the distance between the fields, its chimneys steady against the pale sky. She had come here to reclaim something. She had not expected to find, in the finding, that what she was reclaiming was no longer quite the same thing she had lost, that it had become something else, something with room in it for more than she had originally planned. She was not sure how to name that yet. She was beginning to think she didn't need to. "Send my regards to your solicitor," she said. "Tell him we'll need a longer conversation." Something at the corner of Thorne's mouth shifted, and she had learned by now that this was what it looked like when he was as close to satisfied as he allowed himself to appear. They turned back toward the house together. That evening a letter arrived from her father. It had been forwarded 3 times and was slightly crumpled, written from somewhere in Portugal. He did not know where she was. He did not seem to know much about where she was, or what she had been doing in the months since Philadelphia. The letter was short. It said that the climate in Lisbon was pleasant, and that he hoped she was getting on well, and that he was sorry. Not for anything specific, just the word, dropped into the second paragraph and not returned to. Linnea read it twice. She sat with it for a long time, in the small dining room where the fire was going and the window showed the east garden going dark outside. She thought about her mother, who had loved this house and this room and had raised her in it. She thought about Robert Caldwell, whom she had never met, and the woman who had spent decades writing careful letters that never received answers. She thought about what it costs a person to carry something for 30 years without resolution. She was still sitting there when Thorne came to the doorway. He saw the letter in her hands. "Your father," he said. "Yes." He came in and sat across from her, not at the far end of the table. They had stopped using the far end of the table on approximately the 4th day and had never gone back, but close, at the corner. He did not ask what it said. "He apologizes," she said, without specifying what for. "In the way of men who know the shape of their fault but can't quite face the particular details of it." Thorne said nothing. "I can't forgive him yet," Linnea said. "I want you to know I understand that isn't the same as saying I won't. It's just where I am right now." "I know the difference," he said. And he did. She could tell that he did, from the way he said it, from everything she had learned of how long he had been carrying his own version of this weight. She set the letter on the table. "I wrote to your mother's solicitor," she said, "the one who handled the original Caldwell case. I found the name in her papers." She paused. "There may be grounds for a retrospective claim against my father's estate, whatever remains of it. It wouldn't be large, but it would be documented, official." Thorne looked at her. "I didn't ask you to do that," he said. "I know." She met his eyes. "I did it because it was the right thing, and because your mother spent 30 years trying to do the right thing and running out of time before she managed it. Someone should finish it." The fire made its sound. Outside the garden was dark and still. "Linnea," he said, for the first time using her name without her title or the fiction of Crane attached to it. Just the name, plain and careful. "I know," she said. "I know." She stood and walked to the window. The pear tree was just visible in the last of the light, its bare branches holding the dark sky above the garden wall. It was still the same tree, the same house, the same stone, the same chimneys, the same iron gate that stuck in damp weather. But the way she stood inside all of it, that had changed. She had come back to recover something fixed, and found instead something that was still becoming. She did not know yet exactly what it was becoming. She was beginning to trust that she would find out. When spring came to the Devon coast, it came sideways. Wind first, then rain, then sudden warmth that surprised everyone, including the garden, which put out tentative green along the wall before anyone had given it permission. The pear tree bloomed white. The cliff path dried enough to walk without mud. Linnea walked it every morning, and most mornings Thorne was already out when she reached the upper path, and they had stopped pretending this was a coincidence about 2 months ago. The joint arrangement had been signed in February. It was a legal document, careful and thorough, prepared by a solicitor in Exeter who had asked no more questions than necessary. The house stood in both names now. The debt was formally acknowledged, not erased. That distinction mattered to both of them, for different reasons. Her father's estate, what remained of it, had been subject to a retrospective claim filed on behalf of the Caldwell family's surviving descendants, two of Robert Caldwell's grandchildren, whom Linnea had found through the solicitor's records. The settlement was not large, but it had been made. The thing had been documented and closed, which was not the same as forgetting, but was the same as finishing. Thorne had not cried when he received the documentation, but his hands had not been entirely steady when he held it, and Linnea had been in the room and had seen his hands and had said nothing, because sometimes the right response to a moment is to simply be in it with someone. On a morning in April, they stood on the cliff path together, the sea below bright and restless, the coast stretching south in both directions. "I came here," Linnea said, "to take something back." Thorne looked out at the water. "I know," he said. "I didn't get what I came for." She paused. "Not exactly." He turned to look at her, and she looked back at him. At that face, she now knew well enough to read what was underneath its careful surface, the patience and the weight and the thing that had been slowly becoming something else for months. "What did you get instead?" he asked. She looked at the house behind them on the hill, stone and chimneys, and the east window catching the morning light. "Something I didn't know how to want," she said, "when I came." It was not a declaration. It was not a neat resolution. It was, she thought, the truth, which was almost always less clean than fiction and considerably more durable. Thorne reached over and took her hand, slowly, giving her time to decide. She decided. The sea went on doing what the sea does. The garden below was waking up. Inside Ashworth House, a fire would be lit in the library by mid-morning, and someone would set the breakfast table correctly, with the soup spoon on the left, and the day would proceed the way days do when a person finally stops running from one version of their life toward another and simply stands still inside the one they're in. Some things are lost in ways that can't be fully undone. Some things that look like loss are, in the end, a different kind of arrival. Linnea Ashworth had come home by the longest possible route, through a name she had borrowed and a plan she had outgrown, and she had found that home was not only the house. It was also who was in it. It was also who she had become inside its walls. That was not nothing. That was, she thought, most of everything.